FromSoftware provides some of the best games people can play with some of the greatest challenges in gaming. With the Elden Ring DLC selling extremely well, FromSoft is on top of the world right now, and they are free to do whatever they want with their next game. I have nothing but respect for a company like this, but I would be remiss not to express concern for their future games. Not necessarily over quality or the direction they take, but rather over the game engine they're using. This engine constantly causes one problem: performance issues. But before getting into that, what is the history of this engine and why does FromSoft use it? FromSoft has used their proprietary engine since Demon's Souls. For each game, the engine has been upgraded. Dark Souls 1 was an upgraded version of that original engine. Then it was upgraded for Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, Sekiro, Armored Core 6, then Elden Ring. There are so many benefits to using the same engine all this time. Once systems are created and put in place, they will remain in place. For example, animations and assets are reused, as well as dodging, movement, and other combat mechanics. Even look at the leveling and upgrade systems. They're pretty much the same most of the time, with maybe some slight differences. Most importantly, using the same engine also allows developers to master and work with one single engine, thus being able to develop games far quicker than other companies. Bloodborne released in 2015, Dark Souls 3 in 2016, Sekiro in 2019, and Elden Ring in 2022, with its massive DLC in 2024. I believe Dark Souls 2 and Armored Core 6 were made by other internal teams, but if you want to throw those games in as well, then feel free. It's simply impressive that FromSoft is able to release these types of quality games at such an incredible pace. The engine being enhanced and upgraded does not stop them from being able to improve the game graphically as well, which is another plus. But this engine is a double-edged sword, and it's where my concern lies. As great as it is, FromSoft's engine is taking its toll on their games, specifically in regards to performance. There are two large reasons for performance issues, so let's start with the first reason, which is the engine itself. This engine's performance has been a long-standing issue. Bloodborne was not a consistent 30 FPS by any means, with bad frame pacing as well. Dark Souls 3 on the PS4 and Xbox One could often dip to as low as 20 FPS. Sekiro, at least at launch, suffered from unstable FPS to varying degrees. Then Elden Ring on current-gen consoles does not hold a steady 60 FPS whatsoever in performance mode, and often dips into the 40s. Now some may ask, are the performance issues because of the engine itself, or rather because the consoles are too weak? Luckily, the answer is simple. It's definitely the engine. For example, Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 are both pretty linear games, and both games' graphics were not groundbreaking by any means when they released. There are many examples of better-looking games that ran better around the time Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 released, such as The Order 1886, Gears of War 4, and Uncharted 4, to name a few. Even open-world games like Horizon Zero Dawn would release in 2017, 1 year after Dark Souls 3. Horizon did not only look better, but it ran consistently at 30 FPS at 1080p. The same thing can be said about Elden Ring and the current-gen consoles. Simply put, there are games that look and perform better. Now, the engine is one large reason for performance problems, but I cannot forget about the second reason, which is FromSoft not optimizing their games well. FromSoft is great in almost every way, but when it comes to optimizing their games, it's one of their few weaknesses. Though a good portion of the problem could simply be the engine, as I have discussed, there are many instances where it's definitely an optimization problem. A more recent example is Elden Ring and its DLC running on PS5 versus Xbox Series X. Both consoles are very similar, and if you compare the two in other games, the FPS is often the same or close to being the same, usually within 1 or 2 FPS. In Elden Ring, the Series X is often well below the PS5, sometimes as much as 10 FPS below it. With how similar these two consoles are, both in the internal hardware and overall power, this difference does not point to an engine or console issue. Instead, it points to poor optimization. FromSoft did not do as good of a job with the Series X version, plain and simple. And boy oh boy, the optimization on PC does not get much better. The most recent example, let's talk about that Radahn fight at the end of the DLC. No matter what graphics card you have and whatever settings you choose, some of his Phase 2 moves absolutely murder your frames. One particular move could drop the FPS from 60 into the 20s even. How this got through QA testing and all the way to gamers' hands is beyond me. Luckily, they did patch this and it runs much better, but at the same time, this is direct evidence that it was optimization problems the whole time, since an updated patch solved a lot here. Further, comparing Elden Ring to Dark Souls 3 also shows odd results in the optimization as well. Dark Souls 3 running at 1080p and 900p on last-gen consoles was not a steady 30 FPS, but Elden Ring running on those same consoles at 1080p gets similar FPS as Dark Souls 3. Let that sink in. Elden Ring, an open-world game with better graphics running at the same 1080p and 900p resolutions, is similar in FPS to Dark Souls 3, a game that came out 6 years before. Somehow they optimized Elden Ring pretty well for last-gen consoles, but using this logic, you would think that PlayStation 5 would run Elden Ring at least at 60 FPS, because PS5 runs Dark Souls at 4K 60 with no problem. If they can optimize the PS4 version that well, then it should be the same for PS5. However, that's not the case. If you compare Dark Souls 3 to Elden Ring performance on PS5, Elden Ring stays between 45 to 60 FPS at a dynamic resolution well below 4K, often closer to 1440p. FromSoft somehow optimized the PS4 version to run the game at the same resolution and similar performance as Dark Souls 3, while they could not figure it out for the PS5. It's frustrating, especially because the answer was literally right in front of them. Apparently playing the PS4 version on PS5 allows the game to play at a steady 60 FPS, with negligible differences in graphics. That's a great option for players who want 60 FPS, but the fact remains. It's incredibly weird FromSoft chose not to simply implement the PS4 settings in the PS5 version's performance mode. That way it would have ensured a steady 60 FPS. Every frame makes a big difference in these games, but instead of making sure Elden Ring is optimized the best it can be on consoles, FromSoft instead chose to implement a ray tracing mode on these current-gen consoles, a mode that does not look that different from quality mode. Now, of course, this overall issue of performance has always existed with them, yet that has never stopped anyone from enjoying FromSoft's games or praising how great they are, and rightly so. Their games are simply awesome. However, it's a long-standing issue that needs to be addressed. If their next game is more linear, then that would be the best time to focus on optimization, as vast draw distances and changes to the level of detail are easier to tackle in linear games. Of course, I say this as a solution, but FromSoft games are mostly linear anyways, and always suffer from some performance issues, so it's really just wishful thinking on my end. Now let me be clear, FromSoft is an elite game developer and company, and is constantly at the top of their game. When they release a new title, it's either in contention for Game of the Year, or is Game of the Year. With that being said, between the game engine and optimization, the performance in their games is never where it should be, and it's an issue that's just existed for too long. Of course, if it is between putting out quality games versus focusing on steady performance, I think sales have shown people much prefer FromSoft focusing on the quality of the games themselves. But I just hope for their next game that they can put more time and money towards the engine and optimization. And if they don't, well, I and everyone will buy the game anyway. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.